Hello and welcome to another edition of Ontology Talk. I'm Adam Pease, and today I'd like to talk about another concept that I found from the news, the concept of a shortage. And this was a really interesting one because I think it's a lot deeper and more complex than it might appear at first blush. So, what is a shortage, right? So, let's call it a shortage. But what is a shortage? So firstly, you might think maybe it's an attribute, right? An attribute of some kind of event. But a shortage is the absence of an event. If you're short something, you couldn't buy it or couldn't procure it in some way. So it can't really be an attribute on an event because there is no such event. It just means you weren't able to succeed. You weren't able to procure what you wanted. So I don't think it's a class of events, and I don't think it's an attribute. I think it is a relation. It's a relation between a entity, an agent, which could be an organization, and something it wants to get that it's unable to get. So let's say it's a relation between an agent and a class of objects, because it's you can't have really a shortage of one thing. There's one thing, let's say the Mona Lisa, right? There's no shortage of Mona Lisas. There's only one. It's not really meaningful to talk about a shortage of Mona Lisa paintings, of original Mona Lisa paintings by Leonardo da Vinci. So it has to be a class of objects. And since it's a shortage, I think you have to talk about it's a number of instances or a quantity of a class of object, where that object could be a substance, right? You can have a shortage of oil, a shortage of water. Now, another consideration is, let's say that you are trying to get, say, some diamonds. Is there really a shortage of diamonds in the world? Well, a lot of people would like to have a lot more diamonds, and they'd like to have them for $1 each. Is that actually a shortage? Well, I think it makes clear that a shortage really is about, at one level, price, right? A shortage of employees to work at your restaurant. Well, if you paid those employees $10,000 a day, I don't think you'd have a shortage, right? So a shortage is really an informal notion saying that I have a shortage of something at a given price. So I think that's really fundamental. Now that price could be measured in many different ways. It could be a shortage not of the actual purchase price, but the sort of the total cost to get that object to you. So let's start with this relation between an agent, number of instances or a quantity of a class of object at a particular price or cost. So there are certainly things in the world that are very cheap somewhere, but are really expensive elsewhere. And if it was really cheap enough, well, you could have it shipped in. But part of the cost is that shipping. So, it might be very cheap to get, stereotypically the tea from China, right? It might, at least in history, right now things in China are getting more expensive, and certainly tea can be very expensive. But let's say, right, that you were talking about the 1800s and you're the East India Company. Is there a shortage of tea? Well, there might be if you're looking for a particular tea and you're in Britain, because China or India are a very long way away, and you don't have control over how to just run over there and get them. So you have to figure in this cost of shipping. Whereas, if you actually could miraculously teleport to the source, the cost of the good at the source would be very low. But it's really your total cost that matters. It's the cost of getting those guys on their sailing ships to transport all this material halfway around the world under dangerous conditions in primitive boats to get it to you, and that may make it very expensive by the time it gets to you. And the same is true with really a lot of things, and that's how importers, I guess, kind of make their money, is that arbitrage with the cost of the goods in various places and the cost of shipping and what the customer wants to pay. So that certainly is one feature. Is that a necessary feature? I think so. It's really the total cost. Now, another consideration could be, especially as we're seeing, for example, with lumber, it could be that we expect the cost to be lower in the future, but there's also an implied sort of cost for waiting. Right, so the price will eventually, we trust, come back down, and 2x4s will no longer cost $10 a piece. They'll cost, say, $3 a piece, like they used to in most of North America. But right now they're really expensive, so maybe you aren't buying them because you figure that the cost will go down. So there is a shortage now, and the time actually matters. There may not be a shortage in the future. If you were really flexible, maybe there's no shortage because you can afford to delay your project. If you're time critical, you need to build your house now, then there really is a shortage, at least at this given price. So maybe let's make a couple of notes about. So there's price to worry about, there is time, there's also quantity. Maybe you can have, maybe you're talking about some kind of manufactured good that has to be custom manufactured. Maybe you want some custom furniture. So there could be a shortage of goods, say, from a particular craftsman that has to make you a desk. So he can make only maybe 10 desks a year of very high quality. So there's a shortage with respect to quantity. He'll sell you that one desk for $1,000 delivered next month. But if you wanted 10 of those, he'd have to hire more craftsmen. Maybe the cost would go up and maybe be $3,000 a desk. But if you order just that one desk a month for 3 months, then it might be at a certain price, say $1,000. So the price, the time, the quantity, is the shortage really with respect to a supplier? Only if you can't get that class of goods from another supplier. So I don't think it's really about the supplier necessarily. It's that you can build that into the class, but we don't need to have this as, say, a parameter in a relation. So are all of these things necessary? Price, yes. Time, I'd say yes, and quantity, I think, are all required. And everything else that I can think of, we can actually build into the definition of the class. Say, the quality of a particular good, the materials that are used with it, for at least for finished goods, maybe the craftsman involved, if it's some sort of custom good. All of those things could be part of the class definition. So let's start with this. So let's say that the domain of shortage is going to have to do with price and time. Now let's go back to agent. So it's a relation between, it's a shortage for an agent who wants to have things at a given price, time, and quantity. Is it really dependent upon the agent? Well, it's a shortage for somebody. It's not just a shortage in the abstract. It has to be a shortage for an agent that wants to, or is willing to, or able to pay a particular price for delivery of a particular quantity of goods of a certain class at a certain time. So yeah, I think that the agent really is required. Interesting here, this is a fairly complex relation. You don't often see relations that are really irreducibly amongst many things. Very common to have binary relations, occasionally relations amongst three things, but rare to have this many. So this is, again, I think, a very interesting case. So let's say the domain of shortage is a particular agent. The second argument, let's say, is price. So that's going to be a currency measure in SUMO. it's going to be for a particular time, let's say time period, because things aren't delivered, instantaneously. This is for delivery within a particular time period. Let me just check time period in SUMO. Make sure I've got it right. Because it could actually be something like time interval. Yeah, I think I have it wrong here. So it's not time period, it's time interval. So it's not a duration. It's not an arbitrary, time of 1 week. It's a particular week that I need to get this thing in that time period on the calendar timeline. Okay, so an interval of time. Yes, that looks good. So let's say this is a time interval. And its quantity. Now, let's see. So this is interesting. So quantity can be just a number, a count. So I think we actually are going to have two relationships. So we're going to have shortage by quantity and shortage by number, because we're really then talking fundamentally about different things, substances versus countable items. We don't have we could put in sort of the parent class, I guess, for that. So let's look at number, and let's look at where that is in the okay, so a number is a subclass of quantity, and quantity is abstract, but that's not actually what we want. So we also have the notion of numbers with units. And so that would be, that should be quantity, shouldn't it? Constant quantity, I think. So we have finite quantity. Let's take a look. Finite quantity. No, that's not what we want. Let's look at constant quantity. Just not remembering at the moment. See, even when you're the author of this, so it's a big library. So you need to use these tools to find out what you need. Constant quantity is a physical quantity. Okay, that's where I was getting into trouble. So a physical quantity is a quantity. Okay, that makes sense now. So we're looking at a physical quantity, and quantity is the, so let's look at the graph of this. Maybe that'll make it a little clearer both to me and to all of you listening. Okay, so quantity is the right parent class, which encompasses the notion of both numbers and physical quantities, which are a compound thing of a number plus a unit. So let's put that here. So the last argument, or not the last argument, because we still also need the class itself. In fact, let's reorder this a little bit. I think really the fundamental thing is it's a relationship between an agent and something it wants. So let's make that really primary in a way. I mean, it doesn't really matter what order we put the arguments in, but I like it to be convenient and make sense. So quantity. Is that what I just said? Yeah, because quantities are both numbers or finite quantities. Okay. Great, and let me just renumber these. And then let's talk about what the actual definition of this, the actual formal axioms would be. So if I have a shortage of something at a time, at a quantity, that means that certainly that the agent desires that there be an instance of this particular object. So let's call this instance I. So instance of I is of, I've got two Q's. Let's call it quant Okay, so I have at least, and he wants there to be one of these things, one or more. So it's an instance of, sorry, so this is not a quantity, this is going to be an object, a physical object. Okay, so let's just call it O and Q. Fix that around. Okay, so I have an instance of an object, and crucially wants it to be in his possession. So possesses a O, I, because it's the instance that he wants to possess, not the abstract class. All right, let's close off the parentheses. Okay, so that's one thing. So if there is this shortage, there's something that this individual or organization would like to have. It also means for there to be an actual shortage, you have to have a genuine interest in offering to procure it at such and such a price. So, and you're not able to. So let's again say that if we have a shortage, then that means that there's an offer. So let's look at the information about offering and prices and so forth. So I think we have the notion of offers. So a particular agent offers items from a catalog to his customers. All right, so catalog, I guess, is sort of very broadly speaking, anything could be a catalog. It could be a roadside stand where your catalog is stuff scrawled on a piece of wood saying, offering bananas and coconuts today. So let's say there has to be some vendor. Right? You can't have a shortage of something if nobody. Can you have a shortage of something if nobody ever sells it? Maybe not. No, somebody has got to offer it for some price. If it doesn't even exist, if no one's selling it, if it's not even possible to get someone to sell it, then maybe there isn't a shortage. I'll think about that a little bit. So let's say there exists a seller and a catalog such that, let's look back at this offer. So there's an agent, and agent has a catalog, and then that catalog is going to contain the object. All right, so this is getting a little long already. Let's just stop here and say I will finish this in a future video, but at the very least, I think this is starting to give you hopefully an idea of if you really want to get down to what is a very innocent and otherwise simple term like shortage actually mean, there's really a lot behind it. It's not good enough just to say shortage is a tag or an attribute. And it's not even enough just to say it's a relationship, because you have to go through and figure out what is it a relationship among. And it really requires, I think in this case, a lot of different participating elements. And then to actually formalize what we mean about how those elements participate in this relationship requires even more formalization. So I hope this introduction has been useful to you, and look forward to fleshing this out in a future video. Thanks for watching.